for joining us and welcome to my sewing room. I have a really exciting show for you today. It really has two themes. First, I will be sharing with you exactly how it is you put together heirloom party dress. And second, that wonderful quilt we've been making all series, the beautiful quilt squares. Well, today is the day that we put that lovely heirloom quilt together. Heirloom party dress, a basic high yoke pattern, actually forms the basis for a lot of these dresses that we make, size 3 months to size 12 years. Let me lift the collar on this sweet little christening gown, baptismal gown, blessing dress, or baby dedication dress. Do you see the high yoke right here? This is what I call heirloom party dress. Now, as I travel down this dress, I can put in the fancy band any elements that I would like to. The choice is yours. Remember, the fun of heirloom sewing is that you are the designer. Now here is another little dress about a size 4. This little dress has all different elements built into the collar, built into the high yoke. We have Swiss embroidered insertion, lace, and really a relatively simple fancy band. Just a little bit of beading and lace insertion. The little pink heirloom party dress has a little bit different flavor. The laces and trims go sideways rather than up and down, and this little fancy band is a little bit wider than some of the others. Isn't this a cute dress for about a size 12 months little girl? Swiss embroidery, a very delicate dress, actually a little bit different also. This little fancy yoke has little squares with a lovely shadow work embroidery, and my all-time favorite double needle pin tucks run across the top of the little yoke. Double needle pin tucks are found on the sleeves. And let me turn this sweet little dress around. Double needle pin tucks are also found on the back yoke, and it is closed with little gold beauty pins. That means you don't have to put buttons and buttonholes in the dresses. Our last heirloom party dress, which I showed you this dress originally on our Crazy Patch show, this particular little dress, which looks very different from the white and the pink dresses I have just shared with you, because I have Crazy Patch up here on the yoke with little covered buttons, wonderful dark colors. What I've hoped to show you, what I've hoped to share with you here, is the versatility of the heirloom party dress. You see, you can do almost anything you want to with heirloom party dress. I would like to share with you now the techniques of exactly how it is I put together one of these heirloom party dresses. The first heirloom party dress that I ever made was white on white with a little bit of peach and green. This is a very easy dress to make. The teaching boards today will take you through the whole process of how it is that you can easily and quickly create one of these garments also. Heirloom party dress begins with a front yoke and a back yoke. The front yoke is cut on the fold, and I'll show you how this works in just a minute, and the back yoke traditionally is cut on the selvage. I have created a piece of fabric for the front yoke. I have put in here batiste, lace, Swiss embroidery, and then done the same thing on the other side. After having created this whole, I started to say square of fabric, but actually it's a rectangle of fabric, I take my front yoke pattern and I have dotted it off. In other words, these little dots along here, the little dots go up. You see there's the neckline. Then I'm moving up to move over to the shoulder, and here is the side of the little yoke. In other words, I trace off my front yoke. The next teaching board will show you exactly how that yoke happened. After the square of fabric is made, I cut out along those dotted lines. Here is the little yoke after I have cut out along the dotted lines. Now this is beginning to look more like a party dress, is it not? What happens around the neckline of heirloom party dress? It is very easy to do. I usually put an entredot and gathered lace trim around the neckline. Starting at the neckline, I have pinned the entredot, and by the way, I do not do this on a board. This is just for teaching purposes. I pin the entredot around the neckline of the dress, then I clip the curve since it is on a curve, and I do the three-step process for entredot to flat fabric. See if you remember with me. Number 1, stitch in the ditch. Number 2, trim down to about 1/4 inch. And number 3, zigzag. You can also do this on a serger. I now have the gathered lace, which I need to pull the string and the gathered lace, and the French and English laces anyway. Over here, I have the string that I have pulled to be sure that this lace gathers up so pretty to go around the neckline. The next teaching board, I will show you exactly how the gathered lace gets attached. After the entredot is stitched around the neckline, I simply butt the gathered lace up to the entredot. I butt it and I zigzag the gathered lace to the entredot. I think you can also see, I forgot to tell you, that I put in the shoulder seams on the little yoke. I'm now ready to move to the sleeves of this little dress. So let me move my next teaching boards right here. I cut out the little sleeves. This is a great place to do double needle pin tucks or lace shaping. If you would like to make this little sleeve fancy, please do. This is a great way to show off all of your heirloom skills. The bottom of the little sleeve, or rather this part of the sleeve that joins the bottom of the fabric, will be entredot. Traditionally, I put beading next. That's where I run the ribbons through. And then I will once again gather this lace to join the entredot and the beading of the sleeve. My next board shows you how this particular treatment looks when it is put together. After fixing the sleeve, after cutting it out, that is, I run 2 rows of gathering in the top of the sleeve and 2 rows of gathering at the bottom of the sleeve. When I pull the gathering threads, I try to remember to pull the bobbin threads. Now, the entredot, beading, gathered lace cuff that will go on the bottom of this little sleeve will be the next teaching board. I've gathered it, I'm ready to gather the threads around the top of the sleeve, and now my little sleeve is finished. Cutting the armhole curves is really very interesting. Here is my little illustration of this. There's a little armhole guide, and I cut, by the way, this is a skirt. It's a little short skirt, but it illustrates the skirt. I put the armhole guide over here and cut it out, and this is what my little armhole curve looks like. Now, making a continuous lap placket is not hard to do. As a matter of fact, it's very easy to do. Here's how. This is the continuous lap placket. It's a little binding in the skirt. Now I'm going to flip this up so I can show you how to do this. A continuous lap placket, you first of all start with about a 3 to 4 inch slit in the back of the skirt. Moving over, this is the little piece, the little placket guide that binds the placket. Now on this particular illustration, I have pulled apart the original slit so it comes out. Let me take this off the board. Just give me a second here. Then I put the little binding right down here across that slit that is still pulled out, and I stitch all the way across. And then since this little binding was cut on the selvage, I just flip it in and I do not even have to fold it under. That is how you do a continuous lap placket. The fancy band of the skirt is very easy. Simply zigzag all of these elements together from the entredot all the way down to the entredot on the bottom. It's kind of an entredot sandwich. This is the final version of the skirt. The fancy band is now put together, and here is the ruffle, and I will finally gather the lace and put the gathered lace, if you want to gather it. Actually, on the ruffle, you don't have to have a gather. It just depends on the way you want it to look. I can put it flat to the ruffle or pull a little bit of gather in it. And those are the steps to completing this beautiful little heirloom party dress. Do you remember how we made the yoke? We zigzagged a rectangle together, and then we put the fancy band together, and the sleeves, the little sleeve treatment, That's all there is to doing this lovely fancy yoke dress. And now we're going to go to our silk ribbon embroidery section. I'm pleased to have as my guest today Kathy Brower, who is embroidery editor of So Beautiful magazine. Today, Kathy will share another exciting stitch from the ever-popular silk ribbon embroidery. Welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thank you, Martha. It's a pleasure to be here once again. Today, I'm going to teach our viewers how to do a spiderweb rose. And it's not really a stitch at all. It's just manipulating the ribbon into a beautiful flower. I have a gorgeous example to show you here that was stitched by a friend of mine. And if you'll notice, all of the beautiful spiderweb roses that she's placed delicately around these vines. And what's interesting about this pillow, Martha, is that my friend bought this pillow, purchased it at a store, and then she silk ribboned on top of it. So you don't even have to be able to sew with a sewing machine to do this lovely embroidery. And this was her first attempt, her first design that she ever did with silk ribbon, so it was very easy to pick up. First, I'd like to show you what I've done. Here is the spiderweb rose in a 2mm size ribbon, the spiderweb rose in a 4mm size, and in a 7mm size. I'm going to be using the 7mm width ribbon today. The first step takes a small amount of thread or just one strand of floss. You'll start in the center and you'll move out. This is a very large drawing just for teaching purposes. You'll start in the center. You'll stitch down here, go back to up in the center, down here, up in the center, and so you'll keep going back and forth until you get this wagon wheel or spider web effect. And then what you do is you start your ribbon out in the very center, pull it through. You want to take just take any spoke you want, wrap that. Then what the important thing to do is you're going to weave it. You're going to go over one, under one, over one, under one, all the way around your spider web. And don't pull it tight. You just want to pull it loose and keep it fluffy. The way my friend does it, she keeps her ribbon straight every time she goes around, and it makes a nice three-dimensional rose. Or you can let it twist a little. Twisting's fine too. As you see, I'm just going over one and under one. And when I've gone completely all the way around, it'll be finished. And notice here I've used green thread. You don't want to use an opposite thread. You want to try to match your thread. The little threads might show through on the end, so try to get something clear or white, something that either matches your fabric or your thread. This I thought was a good
for the spokes.
Right, for the spokes. That's right, Martha. And then that way, when you finish your rose, your spokes won't show through so bad. And here I want you to notice that I put a French knot or a colonial knot in the center to give it a little added touch. You'll want to do that after you sew your rose, and you could even add beads for a prettier look too.
Now, what stitch did you use for those beautiful leaves to go beside your spider rose?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. This is our Lazy Daisy stitch, and it makes a nice, fat, fluffy leaf. If you have, say you want a certain color of thread and you need to have a bigger leaf, this is a great way to do it.
Well, thanks, Kathy. That is a beautiful spider web rose. As I promised a little earlier in the show, we have an exciting segment for you now. It is time to put together those beautiful quilt squares that we have been making all series. We have the most beautiful quilt for you. The Heirloom sampler quilt that we've been doing one block every show is now ready to be put together. This quilt is very easy to do, very fast, very quick, and I bet if your schedule is somewhat similar to mine, that's the kind of projects you like the best anyway. Quickly, an overview of how the quilt was attached. Block number 1 is attached to block number 2, is attached to block number 3, is attached to block number 4, using this satin ribbon. So you make this strip, and this strip. Then this long strip is attached to this long strip by using this satin ribbon and all the way across. I would like to come over to the sewing machine. I really believe it will be a lot easier for you to see exactly how this was done by coming over and actually watching this quilt be put together piece by piece. I am so pleased to have as my guest today Margaret Taylor, who is quilting editor for Sew Beautiful magazine and who is the designer of this quilt. Margaret, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Martha. As Martha told you, the quilt she just showed you is comprised of 12 blocks. Those 12 blocks each contain a different heirloom technique. Now, when you start heirloom sewing, you're not your best at first. It's like everything else, it takes practice. So why not make a quilt square, learn the technique, and then it'd go on to the garment or whatever you want to make with that particular technique. And the techniques we use are not really they're basic quilting techniques, but we put our quilts together just a little bit different for this particular show. In place of stripping the quilt together with fabric, we're using double-faced satin ribbon. And what you do is you take a fabric marker and you carefully mark your seam allowances, as I have done on these blocks here. Okay? Then you pin your stabilizer underneath the square. Put your satin ribbon over the top of it. And it takes a lot of pins to hold the satin ribbon in place, because with the difference in the weight of the fabric that you're made the block out of and of the double-faced satin ribbon, the satin ribbon has a tendency to slip. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch down this side of the ribbon. And when you're stitching, remember that you can use rayon thread if you want to add a little bit of shine to it. You can use a decorative stitch. What we're doing today is just simply zigzagging so that you'll see how quick and easy it really can go together. Remember though, when you're doing this, if you want to use a decorative stitch, don't use one that has a lot of satin stitching in it, because it'll take you forever to get it put together. And this is so quick and easy, you want to be able to finish it. And this is what your square will look like once you stitch the satin ribbon down one side. Then you'd simply slip the other block underneath, pin it in place, and zigzag down this side. And then that would have your two blocks together, and you repeat that process until you have your strip of 4 together. This is what they would look like once they're stitched. You see the ribbon stitched down both sides. Then you would go behind and tear away the stabilizer. Let me see if we can do this. There we go. See it just gently tug it, and it'll pull away from your stitching, so because you don't want that bulk left in there when you finish your quilt. Then you've got your blocks, your row of blocks all together. Now if you'll notice, in this particular block, we have silk ribbon embroidery. What better artist palette do you have than these different squares to do your techniques that Kathy Brower has taught you on the other shows? And if you'll notice, on both sides of this block, I've marked with a washout marker my seam allowance. This is the center strip of my quilt, so I attach satin ribbon to both sides. Once I get the satin ribbon pinned in place with my stabilizer, as it shows here, then I stitch the satin ribbon in place, take the other strip of blocks and slip it up and under here, pin it in place, and stitch it down, and I have my top completed. Now the beauty of it is the ease that we put the block together. We're going to make a sandwich. Get hold of it. Okay. We're going to make a sandwich for the back. Since this is Swiss fabric, Swiss batiste, it's a little thin. So we're going to use a layer of Swiss batiste, a layer of batting, and a layer of Swiss batiste.
Now Margaret, will that go behind your quilt top?
That goes behind the quilt top, yes. And Martha, the batting that we're using is a batting, it's a lightweight batting that's made for machine quilting. And you just make your sandwich. Now, make your sandwich a little bit bigger than your top if you're going to do decorative stitching on the quilt, because the machine will pull it up, and I'd rather you have to trim off some of your sandwich than to start quilting and get almost through and the sandwich be too small. And then we've got a little mini top. We couldn't put the whole one together. Thank you, Martha. you do your decorative stitching on top of the satin
Pull it in
ribbon.
a little bit over there, Martha,
Okay.
so everybody can see.
You do your decorative stitching on top of your satin ribbon. And when you're doing this, you're probably wanting to will want to use a larger needle because you're going to be going through several layers of fabric and the layer of batting. You'll stitch it not using a satin stitch because there again it will take a lot of time. This is stitched with decorative rayon ribbon, and then you can roll it up as you start to quilt. You'll roll it up, and these are just some little clips I've got that really work well when you're working with a bigger quilt that holds your roll in place while you're stitching. Then I've taken the lace and I've pinned the lace around the quilt. And when you get back to the point that you want to connect your lace together, simply fold one of the pieces of lace in like this, pull the other piece over and fold it back and pin it in place. Before you start stitching, you may want to go to the corners and pin the lace in the corners down so you don't catch it. And then, Martha, I take another layer of fabric, the width of my quilt, the width and length of my quilt, and this is my back. I pin it in place, stitch all the way around, but I leave an opening big enough to reach in with my hand and turn the quilt. And once I see that I have not caught any of the lace in my seams, then I can go back and finish off my seams and clip my corners, turn my quilt, and stitch it closed. And that's how simple it is to do.
Oh, Margaret, that's so exciting. Thank you so much. This is a beautiful quilt, and I'm looking forward to making one too. I love to collect antique clothes. Let's take a trip to my attic, and I'll share some of these treasures with you. I have 3 precious heirloom party dresses to show you today, turn of the century, out of my grandmother's trunk. By the way, I call this my grandmother's trunk since Joe and I have 6 grandbabies. This little heirloom party dress is absolutely precious. It looks like it's a round yoke dress, but I have a little secret for you. It really is a square yoke heirloom party dress. I'm going to turn up this lace right here. Do you see how this is a square yoke heirloom party dress? Now, the little trick is that this mother or grandmother stitched a little band in a circular fashion with the gathered lace edging, and now this square yoke party dress looks like a round yoke party dress. The hem on this little turn of the century piece is one of the most unusual in my collection. All right, step number 1. The hem has been folded up, about 2 inches. Piece of insertion, another strip of fabric, the same width as this folded up hem has been put in and inserted, another piece of lace, and then one more fabric strip, the same width as that hem, and then gathered lace. I think that's a very unusual dress. A little organdy heirloom party dress with simply laces and pin tucks stitched across the top. The little fancy band, the little skirt, is just a beautiful little simple treatment. The next little heirloom party dress has a perfectly plain skirt except for a few pin tucks. The yoke is very, very sweet. Some of the pieces are stitched straight up and down. 2 of the trims, well, rather 3 of the trims, but I'll get to the 3rd one in just a second. 2 of the trims are stitched straight across, and the 3rd little trim can be used as beading in order to run ribbon through. You can probably guess that I would run silk ribbon through this lovely little Swiss trim that is beading. And the little sleeves are precious too. And do you see how tiny these trims are? Tiny little lace, tiny little Swiss, tiny little lace, and more tiny little gathered lace. Thank you for joining us today in my sewing room. I hope to see you next time.